My parents uninvited me from my adopted sister's 20 years gotcha day anniversary, so I made them admit I was their only successful child. I was adjusting my durag before bed when my parents called. Don't take this the wrong way, but we think it's better if you don't come to your sister's gotcha day. The club just started allowing mixed families. We're not pushing it by bringing both of you. You see, Harper was my adopted sister. White skin, blonde hair that didn't move, perfect blue eyes, and I was their mixed-race son with black skin that couldn't be bleached. I thought if I funded her day, they'd see me differently. Dad jumped in. Look, we already allocated your contribution to other expenses anyway. The $75,000 you sent is being put to good use. They didn't know that the venue, caterers, and florists all had one thing in common: me as their boss. So you're keeping my money but not inviting me? It's Harper's day, Mom said simply. You understand. I gulped and mustered out a yes before hanging up. That's when I decided my family was about to learn what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you. I thought back to my childhood. Mine and Harper's birthdays fall on the same month, 2 weeks apart. Harper's parties cost $5,000 with a bounce house and catered food. Mine was a grocery store cake Mom forgot to pick up until 6 p.m. because of budget issues. By the time Harper hit high school, I was basically invisible, unless I did something wrong. Like when she threw my Xbox down the stairs during an argument, my parents told me, "It's just a game, Malcolm, grow up." But when I accidentally scratched her bike, grounded, and had to pay for repairs out of my allowance. An hour after they hung up on me, my phone rang. It was Celia, the event coordinator of my company. "Mr. Malcolm, your family just called about your sister's celebration. What now? They want to ensure all food is appropriate for their real guests, not urban preferences. They were very specific about menu changes. Celia, can we still cancel their entire booking?" "Cancel? Sir, their event is in 3 weeks. What exactly have they booked with us? The Skyline Ballroom, Golden Catering, Divine Flowers, our transport fleet, photographers. Sir, they've booked nearly $200,000 in services." I laughed. I couldn't help it. My parents had hired my entire company while trying to keep me out. Cancel everything. Silence. Then, "Sir, cancel it all. Venue, food, flowers, everything. Send them a notice that their event has been terminated due to violation of our inclusion policy." "But sir, the event is in 3 weeks. They have 150 guests. Then they better start making calls." My phone started buzzing within minutes. I let it go to voicemail 5 times before finally picking up on Mom's 6th call. "Malcolm!" She was screaming, actually screaming. "What did you do?" "I own every single vendor you hired. Every single one. You've been paying my companies this entire time. But we paid deposits. Almost $100,000 in deposits. Which you're getting back, minus my $75,000. Use it to find new vendors. Good luck booking anything decent with 3 weeks' notice." Mom was crying now. "Malcolm, please. Harper's been talking about this for months. She didn't do anything wrong. Did Harper know you uninvited me? Malcolm, that doesn't matter. Did she? No." More silence. Then quietly, "She said the photos would look better with just her. Then she can have her party on a park bench for all I care." "Malcolm!" Dad again, desperate now. "Your sister's friends. Our friends. Everyone will what? Find out you can't actually afford the lifestyle you've been fronting? That your son you've been trash-talking for 20 years actually owns half this city? We're your parents. No, you're Harper's parents. You made that clear when I was 7. I could hear Mom sobbing in the background, Dad breathing hard like he'd been running. "What do you want?" Dad finally asked. "Money? An apology?" I thought about every birthday party, every graduation, every celebration I'd been pushed out of because I didn't fit their image. "I want you to tell Harper the truth. All of it. Who paid for her party, who owns the vendors, and who you really are. Malcolm. And I want you both to admit something you've never been able to say." "What?" "That I'm your only successful child. Say it. To me, to Harper, to your country club friends. Tell them I'm the only one of your children who doesn't live off Daddy's money." The silence was deafening. We can't." "Then enjoy explaining to 150 guests why there's no party." "Wait!" Dad's voice cracked. I smirked. "Come to my office. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Your office? Excellence Events Headquarters. The building you pass every day downtown." The next morning, they walked into my conference room. Harper was with them, her face swollen from crying. "Say it," I said. No greeting, no small talk. Dad looked at the floor. "You're successful." To my face, he raised his eyes. "You're successful. Harper, did you hear that?" She nodded. "Now the rest." Mom spoke up, her voice cracking. "You're more successful than Harper, and you're our only successful child." "Good. Now you can explain that to your 150 guests with no venue." "But you said—" "I lied, just like you did for 20 years. Mom reached into her purse and pulled out something I never expected to see. It was a letter on fancy paper with a gold seal at the top. Mom's hands shook as she unfolded it and slid it across my conference table. I picked it up and read the header. Brookside Country Club Board of Directors. The letter was dated 2 weeks ago. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Townsend, this correspondence serves to notify you that your family membership has been placed on probationary status pending review. Recent concerns have been raised by several long-standing members regarding member demographics and sponsor relationships. We trust you understand the delicate nature of maintaining our club's traditional standards and atmosphere. The board expects full cooperation in addressing these concerns, particularly regarding guest lists for events held on club premises or associated with club membership. Failure to comply may result in membership suspension or termination. I read it twice. Then I looked up at Mom, whose face was red and blotchy. She couldn't even look at me. Dad cleared his throat and shifted in his chair. His voice came out quiet and strained. He told me they were 3 months behind on their home equity payments. The house, the cars, the lifestyle they'd been showing off for years was all borrowed money. Harper's Gotcha Day party wasn't just a celebration. It was supposed to be their chance to network with potential investors who could bail them out of their financial mess. They'd invited business owners, real estate developers, people with money who might throw them a lifeline. That's why the venue mattered so much. That's why everything had to look perfect. And that's why I couldn't be there, because the country club was basically blackmailing them into keeping me away or losing their membership entirely. I sat back in my conference chair and let it all sink in. My parents weren't just racist. They were broke and desperate. They'd been using Harper's celebration as a business opportunity, trying to save themselves while pushing me out. The country club wasn't just suggesting I stay away. They were forcing it. My parents had chosen their social standing and their financial survival over their own son. Harper sat there crying quietly, her perfect blonde hair falling over her face. She looked small and sad, but I couldn't feel sorry for her right then. She'd gone along with it. She'd said the photos would look better without me. I stood up and walked to my office door. I opened it and called out to Gabrielle Stanton, my corporate counsel. She appeared in the doorway a minute later, professional as always in her gray suit and glasses. I asked her to come in and review the legal exposure of my late-stage cancellation. Gabrielle stepped into the conference room and looked at my parents and Harper sitting there. She didn't say anything about them. She just pulled out a chair and sat down, opening her leather folder and pulling out a pen. My parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't a family matter anymore. This was business. Gabrielle asked me to walk her through the timeline and the reasons for cancellation. I explained the discriminatory language Celia had documented in their vendor requests, the real guests, not urban preferences comment, the fact that they'd uninvited me while keeping my $75,000. Gabrielle took notes and nodded. When I finished, she asked if she could speak with me privately. We stepped out into the hallway, and she closed the conference room door behind us. She told me I needed to issue a clean refund of all deposits. Every penny. I couldn't offset my personal contribution through company accounts. That would be mixing personal and corporate finances, and it could expose excellence events to legal problems. She also said I needed to document everything. The discriminatory emails, the timeline of events, the cancellation notice. If my parents tried to sue, we needed a paper trail showing we had legitimate grounds. I felt my jaw clench. I wanted my parents to feel financial pain. I wanted them to scramble and stress and realize what it cost to treat me like I didn't matter. Gabrielle must have seen it on my face because she put her hand on my arm. She reminded me that I had employees who depended on excellence events for their income. I had a business reputation to protect. My personal feelings couldn't drive company decisions, no matter how much I was hurting. She was right. I knew she was right. But it made me so mad that I had to be the responsible one while my parents got to act like children. We walked back into the conference room and I told my parents they'd get a full refund within 5 business days. Mom looked relieved. Dad started to say something, but I held up my hand. Before he could speak, Celia knocked on the door and came in. She looked stressed. Her normally neat bun had pieces of hair falling out, and she had dark circles under her eyes. She sat down at the table without waiting for me to invite her. She told me straight out that our staff was stressed because of the sudden cancellation and the last-minute chaos. People had been working overtime trying to handle the fallout. Other clients were calling with questions. She said we needed a clear process and a deadline that wasn't driven by my family drama. I felt myself getting defensive. This was my company, my family, my decision. But Celia kept talking. She pointed out that our team had families to feed and bills to pay. They shouldn't have to deal with uncertainty because I was mad at my parents. She wasn't being mean about it. She was just being honest. And she was right. I'd been letting my hurt feelings make business choices, and that wasn't fair to people who worked for me. I took a deep breath and nodded. I told Celia and Gabrielle I understood. Then I turned to my parents and Harper. I said if they wanted any chance of getting services reinstated, they had to meet 3 conditions. First, A written apology to my staff for the discriminatory language in their vendor requests, by name, to Celia and everyone else who'd been affected. Second, public acknowledgement of my role in the family. No more hiding me or pretending I don't exist. Third, written agreement to follow our inclusion policies for any future events. They had 72 hours to respond. After that, the offer was off the table permanently. Dad started to argue, but Mom put her hand on his arm. Harper just stared at the table. They all looked tired and defeated. Gabrielle made notes about the conditions and said she'd draft the formal communication. Celia added that we needed their response in writing, not a phone call or verbal promise. Everything had to be documented. My parents stood up to leave. Dad's shoulders were slumped. Mom's eyes were red. Harper followed them out without looking at me. The conference room felt very quiet after they left. I sat there for a minute just breathing. Gabrielle and Celia stayed with me. Neither of them said anything. They just sat there, and I was grateful for that. That evening, I was at home trying to decompress when my phone buzzed with a text from Harper. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. The text was long and carefully written. Harper said she was sorry for how things looked and that she hadn't thought it through. She talked about the pressure she felt and the expectations from Mom and Dad. She said she understood now that excluding me was wrong. But as I read it, I realized something. Harper was apologizing for the optics, for how it looked, for not thinking. She wasn't apologizing for the actual racism, for going along with excluding her own brother because of the color of his skin. She didn't understand why it was wrong beyond the fact that it made her look bad. I put my phone down without responding. I was tired of explaining, tired of being the one who had to teach my own family how to treat me like a human being. I'd given them conditions and a deadline. Now I just had to wait and see what they'd choose. The next morning, my phone rang before I even got to the office. Unknown number. I answered anyway. A smooth voice came through, the kind that's used to getting what it wants. He introduced himself as Donaldson Gray from the country club board. He said he'd heard about the situation with my parents and wanted to smooth things over, but the way he talked made it clear he wasn't worried about me. He was worried about the club's image. He kept using phrases like delicate position and understanding the circumstances. He suggested I might want to consider how this looked for everyone involved. Code for stop making waves. I let him talk himself in circles for a minute. Then I cut him off. I told him I wasn't interested in helping the club keep doing what they were doing. If they were pushing families to leave out members because of race, they should get ready for people to ask questions, legal questions. The smooth voice got less smooth real fast. He started backpedaling, saying I'd misunderstood. That wasn't what he meant at all. I hung up before he could finish. That afternoon, I pulled up a therapist directory and started scrolling. I needed to talk to someone before I did something I'd regret. The rage was still sitting in my chest like hot coal, and part of me wanted to keep pushing until my parents had nothing left. I found a therapist named Lorraine Walker, who specialized in family stuff and had an opening next week. I booked it. Just having the appointment on my calendar made me breathe a little easier. My email dinged around 4 p.m. Subject line from Dad's address. Apology. I opened it with zero expectations and somehow still got disappointed. The whole thing was corporate speak. Phrases like regrettable misunderstanding and unintended implications. Not once did they say the word racist. Not once did they admit what they actually did. They were sorry I felt hurt. Sorry for any confusion. Sorry the situation had escalated. But not sorry for excluding me from my own sister's party because of my skin. I forwarded it to Gabrielle with one line. Is this what accountability looks like? She called me 10 minutes later. She said the email was garbage, but we needed to talk about something else. The $75,000 I'd sent my parents for the party. I couldn't use company refund processes to keep that money. That was personal money, not corporate money. Mixing the two could create legal problems for Excellence events. I hated hearing it, but I knew she was right. I told her fine, I'd handle the personal money separately. Keep the business clean. She sounded relieved. Celia knocked on my office door right after I hung up with Gabrielle. She had her tablet and her worried face on. She said we had a problem. Word was getting around the vendor community about the cancellation. Other companies were talking. Some of them were saying Excellence events wasn't reliable, that the owner let personal stuff mess with business, that we couldn't be trusted for big events. My stomach dropped. I'd been so focused on my parents I hadn't thought about how this looked to everyone else. My reputation was taking hits because of family drama. Celia said she was fielding questions from other vendors and didn't know what to tell them. We needed a plan. Before I could answer her, my phone rang again. Harrison Madrid, one of my biggest corporate clients. His company did 3 major events a year with us. Big money. I picked up and he got straight to it. He'd heard some things. He wanted to know if our company policies were actually reliable or if personal relationships changed how we did business. He wasn't being mean about it, just direct. He had a board to answer to, and he needed to know if Excellence Events was solid. I told him I'd send him something in writing. He said he'd wait to hear from me before making any decisions. The call lasted maybe 3 minutes, but it felt like an hour. After he hung up, I just sat there staring at my desk. This was getting out of control. I spent that whole evening at my kitchen table drafting a statement. Nothing about my parents specifically. Nothing about the gotcha day party. Just a clear message about our inclusion policies and our right to refuse service when clients violated them. I kept it neutral and professional. Talked about our commitment to treating all people with respect and dignity. How we stood behind those values even when it cost us business. By midnight, I had something I didn't hate. I sent it to Gabrielle and Celia for review. Then I tried to sleep, but mostly just stared at the ceiling. The next morning, Dad called. No smooth talk this time. He was mad. He said I'd violated their contract and they were getting a lawyer. Breach of contract, financial damages, the whole thing. I didn't even respond. Just forwarded the voicemail to Gabrielle. She sent me a draft response an hour later. It laid out exactly how their discriminatory vendor requests had violated our inclusion policy, how we had documented evidence of their language about real guests and urban preferences, how that gave us clear legal grounds for cancellation. She said to let her handle any lawyer they hired, don't engage directly. Wednesday morning, I drove to Lorraine's office for my first appointment. The waiting room had those generic calming paintings and a water feature that was supposed to be relaxing, but just made me need to pee. Lorraine came out right on time. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with kind eyes and a firm handshake. We sat down in her office and she asked me what brought me in. I told her everything. The uninvite, the cancellation, the confrontation, the hollow apology, the business fallout, all of it. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked me one question. What's the difference between justice and revenge? I didn't have a good answer. She said that was okay. That's what we were going to work on. She asked me to make 2 lists before our next session. One list of things I actually needed from this situation. Non-negotiable stuff. The other list of things I wanted to punish my parents for. She said most people couldn't tell the difference at first, that the work was figuring out which was which. I left her office feeling weird. Not better exactly, just different. Like someone had pointed out that I was holding something heavy and maybe I didn't have to carry it the same way. That night, Harper texted me asking if we could talk. Just the 2 of us. No parents. I stared at the message for a solid 10 minutes before responding. I told her we could meet for coffee, but I had rules. No excuses for what happened. No asking me to fix things for Mom and Dad. And if she started trying to guilt me, I was walking out. She agreed immediately. We set it for the next morning at a coffee shop near my office. I barely slept. Part of me wanted to cancel, but another part needed to hear what she had to say without our parents there twisting everything. I got to the coffee shop early and sat in the back corner where I could see the door. Harper walked in exactly on time. Her eyes were red and puffy, like she'd been crying for days. She ordered something at the counter, then came over and sat down across from me. For a minute, neither of us said anything. Then she started talking. She told me she chose the no Malcolm option because she thought the photos would look better with just her and our white parents. She actually said that out loud. The photos would look better, like I was some kind of problem that would ruin the pictures. But then she kept going. She talked about how she'd always felt this pressure to be the perfect adopted daughter, how Mom and Dad would tell their friends about rescuing her from foster care, how she had to prove she belonged in the family and was grateful and well-adjusted, how every mistake she made felt like it reflected on whether adoption was a good idea. She said she thought if the party looked perfect and the photos showed this ideal white family, it would somehow validate all those years of trying to prove she deserved to be there. I felt my anger doing something weird. It didn't go away, but it got more complicated, because I understood what she was describing even though it didn't excuse what she did. She'd been dealing with being the show pony for Mom and Dad's white savior thing, proof they were good people who saved a child, and she thought erasing me from the celebration would make that narrative cleaner. It was messed up, but I got it. I leaned back in my chair and watched her fidget with her coffee cup. Then I said something I hadn't planned to say. What if instead of the big party we did something different? A small family dinner, just the 4 of us, where people actually had to be honest and take real responsibility. Not perform for 150 guests, but only if she was willing to do actual work, not just say sorry and move on. Harper looked up at me with this expression I couldn't quite read. She asked what kind of work. I told her therapy, real conversations about race and adoption, listening when I talked about what it was like growing up in that house. She nodded slowly, said she'd think about it. We finished our coffee without talking much more. When I got back to my office that afternoon, Celia handed me a printed statement. The country club had released it an hour earlier. It was all corporate language about their commitment to diversity and inclusion, how they welcomed families of all backgrounds, how any suggestion otherwise was a misunderstanding of their policies. I read it twice and wanted to throw something, because I knew exactly what was happening. They were covering their asses publicly while still pressuring my parents privately about their guest list. The statement was for show, The real policy hadn't changed at all. I forwarded it to Gabrielle with a note asking if we had any legal angle. She wrote back saying probably not, unless we had proof of explicit discrimination, which we didn't, just my parents' phone call and their fear of bringing me. That same evening, I sat down and wrote out my counter to my parents' weak apology. I made it specific. They needed to write a real apology to my staff by name for the discriminatory language in their vendor requests. They needed to make a donation to a racial justice organization and send me the receipt. And they needed to agree that I would be included in any family celebration they wanted my companies to support. No exceptions, no excuses. I sent it to both of them by email. Mom called within 20 minutes. Her voice was tight and angry. She said I was trying to embarrass the family in front of their social circle, that making them apologize to my staff and donate to some organization would make them look racist. I told her they'd already made themselves look racist. This was just asking them to own it. Dad got on the line and tried a different approach. He offered to increase their payment for the services, add another $20,000 to make up for the trouble. I actually laughed. He still didn't get it. This wasn't about money. It was about them taking actual responsibility for treating me like I didn't matter. The next morning, Gabrielle knocked on my office door with a proposal. She'd drafted a business settlement. My parents could have limited reinstatement of some services if they signed an acknowledgement of the policy violations and a non-disparagement agreement. It would protect the company from any legal claims and give them a partial solution. She'd worked it out so they could have flowers and photography, but not the venue or full catering, a scaled-down version. I read through the documents she'd prepared. They were thorough, professional, exactly what a good lawyer would create to protect the business. But I felt stuck, because part of me didn't want to give them anything. Celia came in while I was still looking at the papers. She didn't wait for me to invite her to speak. She told me flat out that she needed a firm go or no-go date. The staff schedule was getting messed up. Other clients needed our services. She wasn't going to let me keep the whole team in limbo while I worked through my family drama. Her tone wasn't mean, but it was direct. She was right, and I knew it. I looked at both of them sitting across from my desk, my lawyer trying to protect the company, my event coordinator trying to protect the staff, both of them doing their jobs while I was letting personal hurt drive business decisions. I made a choice. I told them to prepare the settlement documents, but I was setting a deadline. My parents had 72 hours to review the terms, sign the acknowledgement, and accept the limited services. If they didn't respond or tried to negotiate, I was done. They could find other vendors and deal with the consequences. Gabrielle nodded and said she'd send everything over with a cover letter explaining the timeline. Celia made a note in her phone about blocking the dates tentatively. Then they both left, and I sat there feeling something I hadn't felt in days, calmer, not happy, not satisfied, but calmer, because I'd set a boundary I could actually live with. The ball was in my parents' court now. They could accept the terms or scramble to find alternatives with 2 weeks left. Either way, I'd done what I needed to do to protect my business and my staff, and that felt like enough. 2 days later, Celia walked into my office holding her phone with a weird look on her face. She told me the email my parents sent about real guests and urban preferences had somehow gotten forwarded to other event companies in the city. 3 vendors reached out to her directly saying they were glad Excellence Events took a stand on the inclusion policy. One catering company even asked if we wanted to partner on future projects because they respected how we handled discriminatory requests. My stomach unclenched reading through the messages Celia showed me. The chatter I'd been worried about was turning into something different. People saw us standing up for our values instead of just canceling out of spite. That afternoon, Harper showed up at my office without calling first. She asked the receptionist if she could see me, and I almost said no, but something made me tell them to send her back. She walked in carrying a folder and her hands were shaking. She pulled out a typed letter addressed to my staff by name. It was an apology acknowledging her role in the discriminatory vendor request. She said she understood if they didn't want to work the event, but she wanted them to know she took responsibility for her part. I read it twice. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. She asked if she could sign it and leave it with me to share with the team. I handed her a pen and watched her add her signature at the bottom. After she left, I made copies and put them in everyone's mailbox. That simple piece of paper changed something in the office energy. My staff saw Harper taking individual responsibility instead of hiding behind our parents. The next morning, I called my parents and told them I'd reinstate 2 services only: flowers and photography. Not the venue, not the catering, not the transport. They could have those 2 things, and that was it. Mom started to argue, but I cut her off and said the offer expired in 24 hours. They had until tomorrow to accept, or I was pulling everything permanently. My phone buzzed 6 hours later with a voicemail from Dad. I could hear him breathing hard before he even started talking. He called the scaled-down package an insult, said I was destroying Harper's special day over pride. His voice got louder as he went on about how I was punishing Harper for something that wasn't her fault. He ended by saying, I'd regret this when I had kids of my own and understood what real family meant. I listened to it 3 times. Each time I felt the urge to call back and cancel everything rising in my chest, but I didn't. I saved the voicemail and went back to work. Thursday afternoon, I drove to Lorraine's office for my second therapy session. She asked how I was feeling about the partial reinstatement, and I told her conflicted. Part of me wanted to give my parents nothing. Another part felt like I was being petty by withholding services they'd paid for. Lorraine introduced this concept she called enoughness. She said sometimes we don't get perfect justice or complete transformation from people who hurt us. Sometimes we get partial acknowledgement and small changes, and we have to decide if that's enough to move forward. She asked me to think about what I actually needed versus what I wanted as punishment. We worked through the difference between holding boundaries and seeking revenge. By the end of the session, I felt steadier about my decision. I wasn't going to get my parents begging for forgiveness or completely changing who they were, but I could protect my business and my staff while giving Harper a chance to do better. That felt like something I could live with. Friday morning, Harrison called my office directly. He said his company reviewed our public statement about inclusion policies and the documentation Gabrielle sent over. He wanted to confirm that Excellence Events would continue handling their annual conference in 8 months. The relief that hit me was about keeping a major account, not about winning against my parents. I thanked him and promised his event would get our full professional attention. After we hung up, I sat at my desk feeling something loosen in my shoulders. My business was going to be okay. The same afternoon, Donaldson from the country club called with what he described as an exciting opportunity. He said the board was launching a diversity initiative, and they wanted to invite me to join the committee. He used words like inclusive and forward-thinking, but I could hear the performance in his voice. They wanted a black face on their committee while keeping their actual membership practices the same. I told him no thanks. He pushed back, saying it would be good for my business profile and the community. I said I wasn't interested in helping them maintain their image while excluding people like me. He got quiet and then ended the call quickly. That weekend, I heard through a mutual contact that my parents booked a restaurant banquet hall as their backup venue. They were scrambling to find caterers who could handle 150 people with less than 2 weeks' notice. I felt detached hearing about it. This was their problem to solve now. I focused on making sure Celia had everything she needed to execute the flowers and photography professionally. Monday morning, Celia pulled the team together to go over the partial reinstatement details. She explained the limited scope clearly and assigned roles for the scaled-down services. After the meeting, 3 staff members stopped by my office separately to say they appreciated how I handled everything. They said it felt good to work for a company that set clear boundaries instead of letting personal drama create ongoing chaos. One person told me my leadership felt steadier now than it had 2 weeks ago. That comment stuck with me more than I expected. The night before Harper's event, I sat in my apartment staring at my phone. The partial reinstatement meant I wasn't technically excluded anymore. I could show up if I wanted to, but something in me knew I shouldn't. This was Harper's day, and my presence would create tension that wasn't fair to her. I ordered a nice gift basket online and wrote a short note saying I hoped she had a good celebration. I kept it neutral and genuine. Then I turned off my phone and went to bed early. I didn't need to be there to prove anything anymore. It was a letter from the country club board placing their family membership on probation due to concerns about member demographics and sponsor relationships. The club was pressuring them to maintain certain appearances, and bringing me would apparently violate those unspoken rules. Dad added that they were 3 months behind on their home equity payments, and the Gotcha Day party was supposed to help them network with potential investors who could bail them out. Their entire lifestyle was more fragile than I ever realized. I sat back in my conference chair processing this information and understanding that my parents weren't just prejudiced, they were desperate and using Harper's celebration as a business opportunity. The country club was basically blackmailing them into excluding me. I told them to leave my office and that I would think about their situation. They walked out quietly, and Harper looked back at me once before following them. 2 days later, I agreed to partial reinstatement of services for flowers and photography only. The event day arrived 3 weeks later, and I spent it at my apartment working on other client projects. Around noon, my phone buzzed with updates from Celia about the restaurant setup. Unexpected rain had forced them to move the outdoor cocktail hour inside, and the backup caterers they hired were running behind schedule. One of the rented table linens arrived in the wrong color, and the DJ showed up an hour late because of the weather. The celebration was happening, but it was nothing like the original vision they had planned. I felt detached reading about the minor disasters unfolding. That evening, Harper texted me a photo of the flower arrangements we had provided. They looked professional and elegant in the dim restaurant lighting. Her message was simple and said, "Thank you for the flowers. They made the day special." It felt genuine rather than performative, and I appreciated that she reached out. I texted back a short response wishing her well. The next day, I heard through a mutual contact that my parents had spun excuses to their 150 guests about the intimate venue change. They claimed they wanted something more personal and meaningful than a big ballroom event. Some people clearly saw through the facade, and I knew their social standing was wobbling, but it hadn't collapsed entirely. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table completing therapy homework that Lorraine had assigned me. I was supposed to write an unsent letter to my younger self about the pain of being erased by my own family. The words came slowly at first, but then poured out across 3 pages. I wrote about the birthday cakes that never came, and the Xbox thrown down the stairs, and the graduations where I stood alone in the crowd. Acknowledging that grief helped me process it in a way that revenge never could. The day after the event, Harper called and asked to talk honestly without our parents present. We met for lunch at a quiet cafe downtown, and she owned her part in my exclusion without excuses or deflection. She admitted that she had always felt pressure as the adopted daughter to prove she belonged, and that excluding me had seemed like the easiest way to fit their image. I listened without interrupting and felt my anger shift into something more complicated. Harper asked if we could work on repairing our sibling relationship slowly and acknowledged it would take time and consistent effort. I told her I was willing to try, but that I needed her to keep showing up with this kind of honesty. She agreed, and we finished lunch with plans to meet again in 2 weeks. Back at my office, Gabrielle stopped by to confirm that the legal files were being closed. No lawsuit had been filed, and no further threats had been made from my parents. We established a monitoring period to ensure they didn't retaliate through other channels, but Gabrielle felt confident the situation was resolved from a legal standpoint. I thanked her for keeping the company protected through everything. The next morning, I gathered my team for a debrief about the entire situation. I apologized for the stress my family situation had created and announced a new conflict of interest policy for handling events involving personal relationships. Taking accountability felt important, and several staff members told me afterward that they appreciated the clear boundaries moving forward. Celia mentioned that morale had improved significantly now that everyone knew personal drama wouldn't disrupt their work environment again. That afternoon, Donaldson sent one more email floating a diversity committee invitation at the country club. I replied clearly that I wasn't interested in tokenism or helping institutions maintain discriminatory practices with a progressive veneer. He didn't respond, and I deleted his contact information from my phone. 2 days later, Dad sent a curt 2-word text that just said, "Proud of you." Mom remained completely silent, which told me everything about who might eventually be capable of real change and who wouldn't. I saved Dad's text, but didn't respond right away because I needed time to figure out what kind of relationship I actually wanted with either of them going forward. I scheduled my next session with Lorraine for the following week because I needed help sorting through everything that happened. Walking into her office felt different this time, less like I was looking for strategy and more like I needed to face something harder. She had me sit in the usual chair and asked how I was doing with the family situation now that Harper's event was behind us. I told her about Dad's text and Mom's silence and how I kept waiting to feel better, but mostly just felt tired. Lorraine nodded and said we needed to talk about grief, which surprised me because nobody died. She explained that I was mourning the family I always wanted versus the family I actually have, and that loss was real, even if it looked different. We spent the hour mapping out what healthy contact with my parents might look like, assuming they were capable of change at all. Lorraine helped me write down specific boundaries that would protect me while leaving room for possible repair if they did the work. By the end, I had a rough outline of rules that felt both scary and necessary. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and turned Lorraine's outline into an actual document. I typed out clear rules for any future contact with my parents. No financial support of any kind, ever. No mixing family and business, which meant they could never hire excellence events again. All communication had to happen through email unless there was a genuine emergency, and I got to define what counted as an emergency. I included exceptions for major health crises or deaths, but nothing else. Writing it all down made my chest feel lighter, like I was finally taking control of something that had controlled me for years. I saved the document and emailed a copy to Lorraine for our next session. 2 days later, Harper texted asking if we could meet for coffee. I almost said no, but remembered my conversation with her after the event and how she seemed willing to do actual work. We met at a quiet place downtown, away from anywhere our parents might show up. Harper ordered first and paid for both our drinks, which felt like a small gesture toward taking responsibility. I told her I was willing to help her think through some career stuff if she wanted, but we needed ground rules. We agreed to meet once a month, always at neutral locations, and our parents were off limits as a topic unless absolutely necessary. Harper looked relieved and thanked me for giving her a chance. I felt cautious, but not completely closed off, which seemed like progress. Over the next month, my business started settling back into normal rhythms. Harrison's company stayed with us, which helped, but I did lose one smaller client who told Celia they felt uncomfortable with all the family drama. It stung, but I understood. Then 2 new clients reached out specifically because they heard about our inclusion policies and wanted to work with a company that stood by those values. One was a nonprofit focused on racial justice work. The other was a tech startup with a diverse leadership team. Both contracts were solid, and I felt like the business was actually stronger for having clear principles. I heard through a mutual friend who knew my parents socially that they were making quiet changes at home. They sold Dad's boat, and Mom's luxury car got traded for something more practical. Their country club membership stayed active, but they stopped hosting the big parties, and their social circle seemed smaller. The friend said people were adjusting to the new reality, but nobody was completely cutting them off. It felt like real consequences without total destruction, which was probably the most realistic outcome I could hope for. The following weekend, my company sponsored a small community event at a local park. Nothing fancy, but it aligned with our values. I decided to go and actually be present instead of just sending staff. I walked around talking to people, handed out some business cards, and spent time in a space that felt genuine instead of performative. Nobody there cared about my family drama or what club I belonged to. They just wanted good event services and appreciated that we showed up for community stuff. It reminded me why I started Excellence Events in the first place. Back at the office the next week, Celia stopped by my desk with feedback from the team. She said staff morale had improved a lot now that we had clear policies in place, and everyone knew personal drama would not mess up their work environment again. People felt safer knowing there were boundaries and rules that applied to everyone, including me. Hearing that made me realize how much my initial reaction had affected people beyond just my family. Setting professional boundaries helped everyone, not just me. A few weeks later, Harper sent me a text saying she started seeing a therapist to work through adoption stuff and the pressure she felt growing up. She said her therapist was helping her understand the trauma of being the perfect white daughter who had to prove she belonged. Harper shared this without asking me to fix anything or make her feel better about it, which I appreciated. It felt like she was doing her own work instead of expecting me to carry her emotional load. I spent an afternoon drafting a mission statement for Excellence Events that made our values crystal clear. I wrote about our commitment to serving all clients with dignity, our right to refuse service when requests violated our principles, and our belief that events should celebrate people as they are. It named inclusion directly and explained why it mattered to us as a company. I printed it out, framed it, and hung it in our main office. Celia helped me add it to our website too, right on the front page where potential clients would see it immediately. 3 months after the confrontation in my conference room, a letter arrived at my office with Dad's handwriting on the envelope. I almost threw it away, but curiosity won. Inside was 3 pages of his actual handwriting, not typed, talking about specific things from my childhood. He named the Xbox incident and how wrong it was to dismiss my feelings. He mentioned my 7th birthday when they forgot the cake and how that must have hurt. He wrote about comparing me to Harper constantly and how unfair that was. The letter was not perfect, and he still made some excuses, but it was more honest than anything he had said to me in years. I read it twice, then filed it away. I did not know if I would respond yet, but I kept it. A week later, Mom's email appeared in my inbox with the subject line, "Coffee?" I opened it and read her short message asking if we could meet just the 2 of us to talk. She said she wanted to understand what happened and work on repairing things between us. I sat at my desk, staring at the screen for a solid 10 minutes before I started typing my response. I told her I wasn't ready for coffee yet, but suggested we could start with occasional phone calls first and see how that went. I hit send before I could overthink it and felt okay with that boundary. The same afternoon, Celia knocked on my office door, holding a contract folder with a huge smile on her face. Harrison's company had just booked Excellence Events for their major annual conference worth over $300,000. She showed me the email from their team, citing our professionalism and clear values as the deciding factors in choosing us over 3 other event companies. I read through their message twice, feeling this weird mix of pride and relief wash over me. The business growth felt like proof that standing by my principles hadn't destroyed my company, but actually strengthened it in ways I never expected. Harper and I started meeting for lunch every other week without our parents involved at all. We talked honestly about race and adoption and all the messed up family stuff we'd never discussed before. She told me about feeling pressure to be the perfect white daughter who proved our parents made the right choice adopting her. I shared how invisible I felt growing up and how their treatment taught me I didn't belong in my own family. Our conversations weren't easy, and sometimes we disagreed about what certain moments meant, but it felt real in a way our relationship never was before. We were building something genuine between us, separate from mom and dad's influence. I realized one morning while reviewing quarterly reports that I didn't get the clean victory I initially wanted from all this. My parents hadn't fully transformed into different people who suddenly understood everything they did wrong. The country club still operated the same way with its barely hidden discrimination. Some relationships in my family remained broken and might stay that way forever, but I had clear boundaries I could live behind that protected my peace. I had a business I felt proud of that reflected my actual values, and I had the real possibility of slow repair with Harper built on honesty instead of pretending. Sitting there looking at our company's growth numbers and thinking about my next lunch with Harper, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. It was enough.